Okay, in this lecture, we're going to be explaining and introducing plant nutrition and understanding the essential nutrients in plant growth. So, in our last lecture, we learned about the different nutrients and how they can be deficient or toxic depending on what pH the soil is. So, in this case, when we're dealing with nutrient deficiencies, it's very important to determine really what the plant initially looks like and asking some common questions before diving into, trying to diagnose the nutrient deficiency that we actually see. So, we really have to determine when we're diagnosing deficiencies what that plant, the healthy plant looks like for that specific plant species. So, what is the plant? You need to have proper identification of the plant species. How old is the plant? What is normal for the plant, the specific plant characteristics? What kind of environmental conditions is the plant dealing with? So, knowing the area, knowing the zone, knowing if there was any extremes within the weather is beneficial. What are the symptoms? Looking at the symptoms, seeing if it's from new growth or old growth, and seeing if it's chlorotic or where the chlorosis is occurring, if it's within the veins, if it's intervenal, or if it's marginal. Where the symptoms are now, and where did the symptoms start is very important to note. Okay, so first we're going to dive into the primary macronutrients. The first one being nitrogen. So, just some things to know about nitrogen is the main element that plants need the most of, and it will need nitrogen more than any other element. And nitrogen is the essential building blocks of proteins and of chlorophyll as well. Another thing is nitrogen is the most mobile nutrient and it falls out of the soil very easily. So that's why we mostly need to apply nitrogen because it leaches so easily. It's very mobile, unlike other elements that we're going to be discussing. So, some things that nitrogen does, it speeds growth within the plant, it contributes to root health. That there's that chlorophyll element as well. The use of water is there, and it transforms carbohydrates into proteins or that energy. So when you have just enough nitrogen, there's a steady growth rate. There's not too much fluctuation. Looking back at the terminals and the current season growth and previous season growth, it's very steady, and there's an increase of flower and fruit production as well. When there's too much nitrogen, there's going to be a lot of succulent growth. There's going to be a lot of that flush growth that's going to occur. And this flush growth comes along with the plants being very weak and leggy, have long stems. And then the color of the leaves are a very deep green. So when determining if it's a nitrogen deficiency, the older leaves are usually chlorotic first, and then that new growth has like a lighter green, but it's going to be there's going to be more chlorosis on older leaves than on the new growth. And here you can see that those lower leaves and the older leaves are a lot yellower, and then the newer leaves have a lighter green tone to them. Here again with the maize, we have the lower leaves, more chlorosis. There's chlorotic. The leaves are chlorotic and somewhat necrotic, and then the upper leaves are green. And our optimal range for nitrogen is between 6.0 and 8.0. So anything below, 6.0 to 5.5, you're in the medium range, and then anything below that, that's when you're going to be seeing a lot of those symptoms. And likewise for anything above 8.0, really 8.5 to 9.0, that's when you're going to be seeing those symptoms as well. Because even though it's a toxicity, that still inhibits the nitrogen to be absorbed into the soil and into the plants. Next, we're going to get into phosphorus. So phosphorus is an essential part of chromosomes and moving energy. There's also an encouragement of the cell membranes. It encourages root growth and improves the uptake of water within roots. This also helps fight off diseases and makes the plant more cold tolerant, and this promotes flowering. When there's an adequate amount of phosphorus, there's a good stress tolerance, there's an increase in flower and fruit production and rapid root growth. When there's too much phosphorus, this creates that zinc and iron deficiencies because it's tied up. And it's very hard to determine if it's an iron deficiency or if it's an actual phosphorus toxicity. So phosphorus is mobile, so you're going to see it throughout the whole entire plant. And the older leaves are the first one to be affected. So the older leaves, again, just like with nitrogen, how the older leaves are affected first, and then the leaf tips also look burnt. And the older leaves turn dark green to a reddish purple tint as well. And something to note that phosphorus deficiency is very rare in the landscape, but this still may happen a lot of times in agriculture. This occurs. So the optimal range for phosphorus is at 6.5 to 7.5. So really anything below or above that, you may see issues with that phosphorus deficiency, but it first affects the older leaves, and then you're going to have that purplish coloration on the leaf tips as well. Next, we have potassium. Potassium promotes the opening and closing of the leaf stomata, and it also increases the osmotic uptake of water by roots, increasing the size of the cells, and helps move the sugars made by photosynthesis, and also helps build the cellulose. So with adequate potassium, we have a really good stress tolerance, increasing flower and fruit production, and it also builds proteins. With too much potassium, it inhibits uptake of other cations, specifically calcium, magnesium. With potassium deficiencies, the older leaves are affected first, and the older leaves may wilt, and it may have a scorched margin as well. And scorched margin is yellow and brown on the perimeter of the foliage, and it has that interveinal chlorosis, and that's chlorosis within the veins of the foliage. And that scorching also moves inward from the leaf margins, but it is first found on the leaf margins, and over time it will move in throughout the veins. And then here we have the older leaves that are affected first, that are affected the hardest. And then you see how there is that marginal scorch, but also that interveinal chlorosis and scorch that also occurs. Then on the newer leaves, what first occurs is that upper scorch on the margins, on the tip of the foliage, and then it's starting to go downward throughout the leaves as well. With potassium, anything under that 6.0, you may see those symptoms for potassium deficiencies. So now we want to get into the secondary macronutrients, which is calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. First, calcium. With adequate calcium, there's strong cell walls, strong stems, and it's resistant to fungal diseases. Now, with too much calcium, this inhibits uptake of other cations again, but with potassium and magnesium primarily. Now, something to know with calcium, that is not mobile, so it's not going to take out the whole entire plant because it's not mobile like the other macronutrients that we went over. So with calcium, whenever you have a calcium deficiency, the new leaves are will first have symptoms, not the older leaves. So the new leaves are distorted. They may have marginal necrosis, and it's not marginal chlorosis where it's yellowing, but necrosis where it is dead. And then you may also get blossom end rot, and that's a type of disease. Here again, with calcium deficiency, this is first affected by the new leaf growth, and you can see how this is on the terminals. So on the margins of those needles, that's where you're going to see the necrotic scorching appear. Really anything below 7.0, you're gonna start seeing issues with calcium deficiencies. Next, we have magnesium. With adequate magnesium, the plant is going to look nice and green because it has the right amount of elements to provide for chlorophyll. And then with adequate magnesium, there's an improved phosphorus uptake, and it also builds carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. With too much magnesium, this also inhibits the uptake of other cations like potassium and calcium. With magnesium deficiency, those older leaves are going to be affected first because magnesium is mobile. So the older leaves turn yellow or chlorotic at the edge or the margins. And then there's almost like a green arrow shape in the center of the leaf, as you could see in the leaf on the right hand side. So we have the chlorosis surrounding it on the tip, on the margins almost, and then we have that arrow like shape in the center. And this may turn purple, that the yellow margin may turn like a purplish color as well. Here again, with magnesium deficiency, we see not how the newer leaves are turning, but the older leaves are turning, that the marginal chlorosis, and then how in the center we still have that green healthy arrow. And anything below 7.0 or above 8.0, there may be issues with magnesium deficiencies. Next, we have sulfur. With adequate sulfur, there's going to be good amounts of proteins, and it speeds up chlorophyll production, so the leaves are going to be nice and green. There's going to be really healthy root growth and hardiness, and it also improves the seed set. With too much sulfur, there's no necessarily like a negative effect to the plant itself, but it acidifies the soil. Now, with sulfur deficiencies, the younger leaves are affected first because sulfur is non-mobile. So those younger leaves turn yellow, and sometimes the older leaves turn yellow, but most likely those younger leaves are going to turn yellow prior to the older leaves. And in general, the yellowing goes across the whole entire leaf. It's not just marginal or inner banal or anything like that. It covers the whole entire leaf, and it also stunts the size of it. So stunting is when the plant stops growing. So you're going to have the full entire leaf turn yellow, and this only affects the new leaves because it is not mobile. So anything below 6.0, that's when you're going to see those sulfur deficiencies occur. Now we're going to get into micronutrients, and that includes iron, manganese, zinc, copper, and nickel. First, we're going to touch on iron. When you have adequate iron, this is the essential for function of chlorophyll, so you're going to have a nice green color to the foliage. And this also promotes the transfer of electrons in chemical processes. So this is when plants are performing their best. So they're going to be resistant to some diseases and insects, and they're going to be nice and healthy looking. But with too much iron, the chlorophyll does not function well, and it can't produce energy. So when that occurs, there's going to be a lack of chlorophyll, turning to more yellow. This also hinders cation uptake and nitrogen and phosphorus uptake as well. Iron is not mobile, so when elements are not mobile, the new leaves are usually affected. When they are mobile, the older leaves are affected. So since iron is not mobile, the new leaves are first affected, and those younger leaves turn chlorotic or yellow. And you could think of that as iron chlorosis. And this yellowing is very strong, this strong chlorosis in leaves, and it may start at the heart of the leaf from the base and then radiate outwards. And the veins, but you can still see the veins are still that green. You're going to see everything else go yellow. So not the margins, it doesn't affect the margins first, like a lot of the other elements that we went over, but it starts from the very center. and then radiates outward. And then this also will promote branch dieback. Now here we can see the iron deficiencies that we have and that iron chlorosis. You see how chlorotic these leaves get when they're iron deficient. And this occurs a lot in maples, that you guys can remember that. You can see how the veins are still green, and that's something to note when diagnosing deficiencies, especially iron deficiencies. Here, it's anything above 6.5 that you're going to find these iron deficiencies. Next, we're going to discuss manganese. With adequate manganese, this is going to promote seed germination, and it also acts to form chlorophyll, so you're going to have nice green leaves, and it increases the rate of plant maturity. With too much manganese, it inhibits uptake of other cations such as potassium and calcium. Manganese is not mobile, and it affects the new leaves first. It has interveinal chlorosis on younger leaves. As you can see here, we have that chlorosis, but the veins are still going to remain very deep green. And this is not as distinct as with iron. Okay, so we're going to see this a lot more green here. There's going to be a reduction in the size of the plant parts as well, so everything is going to be stunted. The leaves are going to be stunted, the shoots and fruit, everything is going to be smaller. And there's also going to be some dead spots or branches from complete dieback. Here we have manganese deficiency again, and you can see all throughout the veins, all of the veins are still green. So that's why they say interveinal chlorosis, because it's in between the veins that this is occurring. And that's where they get that interveinal, because the veins are still green. And this occurs with pHs above 6.5, but gets extremely bad with pH below or above 7.5. Next, we're going to discuss zinc. With adequate zinc, there's going to be healthy green leaves due to the chlorophyll. And with adequate zinc, it also controls the production of indoleacetic acid. It's a plant growth stimulant. But with too much zinc, this inhibits uptake of other cations again, primarily potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Zinc is not mobile, so this is going to affect the new leaves first, and then we're going to have interveinal chlorosis again on those newer leaves. The leaves are going to remain small, they're going to be stunted, and the terminal leaves may form a rosette because they're still so small and they can't grow larger. The leaves tend to curve to one another as well because they're so crinkled and they cannot expand. Here are some examples of zinc deficiency, and you can see the interveinal chlorosis and kind of the crinkling of the leaves as well. This occurs when the pH levels are above 7.0, but specifically when they go above 8.5. Next, we're going to discuss copper. With adequate copper, this improves sugar production and improves color as well, other than just the green coloration. But with too much copper, this inhibits still that uptake of other cations like potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Copper is not mobile, so this is going to affect the new leaves first. And the new leaves curl very tightly to each other. The growth is stunted, and the leaves can become limp as well. And not only the leaves, but the seed stalks also become very limp, and they bend over very easily. So here we could see with copper deficiency how the newer leaves are curled and distorted and going limp. Anything above 7.0, specifically going above 8.5, you're going to have copper deficiencies. Now we're going to discuss nickel. With adequate nickel, this metabolizes nitrogen, but with too much nickel, it could be poisonous to the environment. Nickel is not mobile, so this is going to affect the first year's growth, and it's going to almost create a mouse ear. So it's going to be stunted growth. It's going to have a marginal to a marginal necrotic or chlorotic form to it as well, and this is going to come on new leaves first. Other micronutrients that we're going to cover is boron, molybdenum, and chlorine. First, we're going to focus on boron. With adequate boron, there's an increase in cell wall strength, improved pollination, and it aids in production of sugars. With too much boron, intraveinal chlorosis can occur. The leaves can become chlorotic, and the leaf tips can also become necrotic from burning. Boron is not mobile, so this is going to affect new leaves first. The terminal buds can become necrotic, and they can die. There can be witch's broom that may occur, and the leaves may turn yellow to reddish, or yellow discoloration of the upper portion of the leaf. There can be short nodes, and then few flowers as well, and this all occurs on the new leaves first. And then boron deficiencies can occur above a pH of 7.0, but specifically between 7.5 and 8.5. Next, we're going to talk about molybdenum. With adequate amounts, we're going to have proper nitrogen, and there's generally plenty in the soil unless the soil is extremely acidic. And then with too much, this can be toxic to the soil. This is mobile, so the older leaves are going to be affected first, and there may be a slight chlorosis within the older leaves, generally yellowing that may occur, and then the leaf margin may become burned. The rest of the plant is usually a light green and stunted. Here again, we have the chlorosis of the older leaves and almost like the marginal necrosis occurring as well. And this deficiency occurs with pHs under 7.0, but specifically 7.5 or under. Next, we have chlorine. With adequate chlorine, the stomata function works properly and it influences water movement. With too much, toxicities can occur. Chlorine is mobile, so the older leaves are going to be affected first. Necrotic leaf tips will occur, and chlorotic mottling may occur as well. And mottling is when you have speckling that's across the foliage. But the margin throughout this process stays green, which is really important to note. So everything else is chlorotic to necrotic, but the margins of the leaves stay green, especially of the old leaves stay green. And anything above or anything below 6.0, specifically 5.5, chlorine deficiencies may occur. So here's just a summary on some stuff that you guys need to memorize, but these are the elements that we really need to keep our eyes on. So the non-mineral nutrients, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but the primary macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The secondary macronutrients, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and then the micros as well. So with the primary macronutrients, nitrogen promotes rapid succulent growth and makes the plant green. Phosphorus is early root growth and improves blooming and provides resistance to pests and weather. And potassium adds strength and resistance to pests. And here's a really good diagram to see where you actually see the deficiencies, because if you see it on the older growth, those are the mobile elements. And if you see it on the newer growth, which is the outward growth, that is the immobile elements. So you can narrow it down a little bit better.